Mid-February 1943, Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. In the middle of the desert, a captured American M4A1 Sherman tank rolled to a stop, its white star still faintly visible under a freshly painted German cross. Officers from Germany's heavy Panzer Battalion 501 gathered around it, notebooks ready. This was a rare prize. This single American tank, captured fully intact during the Battle of Sidi Bouzid, would soon shake German confidence in their own engineering. It wasn't because of heavier armor or deadlier guns. It was something the Germans had overlooked: reliability. The Sherman simply refused to break down. Painted on the hull were the words, War Daddy 2. Its serial number, USA 3067641, showed it was built by Lima Locomotive Works, and it belonged to Company G, 1st Armored Regiment, 1st Armored Division. A German reconnaissance team drove War Daddy 2 over 350 kilometers of rough North African desert to the port of Sfax, a journey that took 4.5 days. What they saw during that trip stunned them. The engine never overheated. The transmission never failed. The drives ran smoothly the entire way. For German crews used to constant breakdowns, it was unbelievable. This American tank just kept going, mile after mile, across terrain that would have stopped their own machines cold. At Sfax, War Daddy 2 was loaded onto a cargo ship bound for Germany. The order from the Army Weapons Office was clear. The tank must arrive intact and operational at the Kummersdorf testing facility near Berlin. German intelligence had heard rumors of American mass production before, but now they would see it with their own eyes. The Sherman represented something Germany couldn't match: industrial scale and automotive mastery. It wasn't just a tank. It was proof that American industry could build thousands of complex machines that actually worked, and kept working. Spring 1943, Kummersdorf Proving Ground. Brandenburg, Germany. War Daddy 2 arrived on a railcar, now marked Zugkraft 259 and given a German license plate, WH058941. Engineers stenciled armor thickness and angle markings all over its surface, preparing for a full examination. Kummersdorf, just 25 kilometers south of Berlin, was the German Army's top testing site for both their own tanks and captured Allied vehicles. Here, teams of meticulous engineers would test everything: track tension, transmission efficiency, engine reliability, every bolt and bearing. From the start, the Sherman fascinated them. They photographed it from every angle, measured every gap, and took apart components for study. To their surprise, everything was simpler than expected, straightforward, efficient, and built for mass production, not perfection. One part immediately stood out: the transmission. German tanks used straight-cut gears that needed extreme precision and constant maintenance. The Sherman, by contrast, used herringbone gears which spread stress evenly across multiple teeth. This design had been standard in American cars since the 1930s: durable, smooth, and easy to produce. German factories couldn't mass-produce such gears economically, but the Americans were making thousands of them. Next came the driving trials. German engineers ran War Daddy 2 through obstacle courses, checked fuel use, recorded temperatures, and tested how it handled rough ground. After every run, they tore it apart again to study the wear. The results shocked them. The Sherman didn't just perform well, it kept performing. It needed no maintenance. It ran cleanly, smoothly, and predictably. It wasn't faster or more powerful than German tanks, but it was reliable. And that changed everything. The 5-speed synchronized transmission made it easy to drive, almost like a car. Any soldier with basic driving knowledge could operate it. German tanks, on the other hand, required expert drivers trained in delicate double clutching and throttle control. The Americans had built a tank for ordinary soldiers. The Germans had built tanks for engineers. Under the hood, the Continental R975 radial engine impressed even the toughest critics. It ran steadily in all conditions: desert heat, rough terrain, heavy loads, with a tolerance. The Germans could only admire engineers. Noticed something remarkable: the Sherman's engine stayed steady across temperatures that would have made German engines overheat or lose power. Its cooling system, though basic, worked brilliantly. Even the air filters, designed to handle desert sand, kept running without the clogging problems that constantly plagued German tanks in North Africa. Every part of the Sherman reflected a clear, practical design philosophy: Make it work reliably, not just look perfect on paper. June 6-7, 1945. Hillersleben Artillery ranged Germany's armaments minister, Albert Speer, arrived to oversee a major weapons demonstration. The event brought together top industry leaders and senior Wehrmacht officers. The highlight of the day was a hill-climbing trial comparing German and captured Allied tanks. Side by side stood three machines: War Daddy II, the captured American Sherman, a brand-new Panzer WWII, and a massive Ferdinand tank destroyer. Germany's pride in advanced tank design, Speer, who personally reported to Hitler, wanted to see firsthand what American industry was capable of and how German tanks truly compared. The results were not what he expected. The Sherman climbed the steep test hill smoothly and confidently. Its 5-speed synchronized transmission shifted without effort, and the engine kept a steady, powerful pull all the way up. The German driver handling it showed how easy it was to operate, a hallmark of the Sherman's reputation. Then came the Panther. Despite its mighty 700-horsepower Maybach engine, it only just managed to match the Sherman's performance, and with far more effort. Finally, the Ferdinand began its climb. Weighing 65 tons and fitted with a complex electric transmission, it stalled halfway up the hill. Recovery crews scrambled to restart it in front of dozens of officers and industrial officials, an embarrassing scene no one forgot. Years later, Speer recalled these moments in his memoirs, noting how impressed he'd been by the Sherman's mobility. When he visited Italy in October 1944, reports confirmed that the Sherman could climb mountains German experts believed impossible for tanks. The reason was simple: its engine had excellent power for its weight, giving it better cross-country mobility than any German tank. Even the 26th Panzer Division had officially reported this advantage. Speer's words carried great weight in military circles, and his public comments soon appeared in Das Reich newspaper on June 27, 1943. The article cautiously praised the Sherman, calling it one of the special accomplishments of North American laboratories and a praiseworthy product of American steel industry. It admired the efficient serial production and the way it met, almost arrogantly, the high standards of the U.S. automobile industry. It even acknowledged the gyro-stabilized gun as a world-first innovation. Officially, these were polite compliments. Privately, German engineers were alarmed. They now realized that American tanks weren't just good enough, they were better engineered for long-term combat. Back at Kummersdorf, testing continued through the summer and fall of 1943. Engineers pushed the Sherman to its limits, running it over 2,000 kilometers before it needed major maintenance, nearly 4 times farther than early Panthers could manage. They found the Sherman's transmission efficiency was higher than any German tank, losing far less power through the drivetrain. The synchronized gearbox made shifting smooth and simple, no double clutching, no tricky rev matching, just easy, reliable driving. Then came another surprise: the final drives. German Panthers used a design inherited from the Tiger, with straight-cut gears that couldn't handle heavy loads. These often failed after less than 100 km in the field, leaving tanks stranded. The Sherman, however, used herringbone gears, the same durable design as its transmission. These rarely failed, even in brutal combat. Decades later, restorers found Sherman final drives still in perfect working condition, a lasting testament to how overbuilt and reliable they were. By late 1943, Kummersdorf's engineers had gathered enough data for a full internal report. The conclusions, shared among Wehrmacht and Armaments Ministry officials, were sobering. The Sherman proved that American automotive engineering was far ahead of Germany's. While Germany focused on precision and theory, America mastered practical performance. American factories used wide tolerances that German engineers would have called sloppy, yet their tanks worked better in the field. Interchangeable parts meant Shermans could be repaired anywhere with basic tools. German tanks, by contrast, needed factory-level precision and expert mechanics. The entire U.S. approach centered on keeping tanks running, not chasing technical perfection that broke down under real combat conditions. German engineers realized that America's advantage wasn't just in numbers, it was in experience. The U.S. had decades of civilian car production behind it, while Germany never had such a large-scale automotive culture. Before the war, millions of Americans owned cars. In Germany, cars were luxury items for the rich or party officials. The much-publicized Volkswagen project, promised since 1934, had produced fewer than 1,000 cars by 1939. That difference, a nation of drivers versus a nation of designers, shaped how each side built its tanks. And in that contrast, the Sherman's reliability told the whole story. American tanks were built so that ordinary mechanics, people with basic car repair experience, could maintain them using the skills they already had. German tanks, on the other hand, demanded specialist crews with years of technical training and constant expert attention just to stay running. By late 1943 and early 1944, the difference in reliability between American and German tanks had become impossible to ignore. The Panther, Germany's newest and most advanced tank, came with a long list of operating restrictions meant to prevent it from breaking down. Drivers were told not to shift gears too often because the gearbox was fragile. Third gear, in particular, was so prone to failure that manuals warned against using it unless absolutely necessary. Panthers also couldn't turn while reversing. Doing so risked destroying the transmission. Even pivot turns were risky and could only be done if both tracks had equal traction, which severely limited what the tank could do in combat. Worse, a small rock or piece of debris in the running gear could jam the drive sprocket, leaving the tank immobile for hours while crews cleared it by hand. And all this came from tanks built in specialized factories, by highly skilled workers, using the best materials Germany could find. The Sherman, by contrast, came from a completely different world. It was designed not by military engineers, but by the industrial giants General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, companies that had spent decades perfecting mass production for cars and trucks. Wherever possible, they used commercial automotive components already proven in civilian vehicles. The transmission, for example, was produced by several companies, Caterpillar, Buick, and Ford, all following the same blueprints, creating fully interchangeable parts that fit perfectly no matter who made them. This kind of standardization was routine in American industry. In Germany, it was mostly theoretical. Each factory introduced tiny design differences that made parts incompatible between tanks built by different manufacturers. Throughout 1943 and 1944, more captured Shermans arrived at Kummersdorf, including one seized from British units in Italy and from Soviet forces on the Eastern Front. German engineers tested each one thoroughly, building a detailed database on American tank design and performance. Some of the British Shermans had been refitted with the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, creating the famous Firefly variant, a major upgrade that solved the Sherman's biggest weakness, firepower. German engineers were impressed. The Sherman's large turret ring allowed the installation of this much larger gun with only minor modifications. That flexibility showed that the Sherman had been designed with room to grow, something the Germans had not planned for. The Panther, which had been rushed into production to counter the Soviet T-34, had no real upgrade capacity. Any major improvement would have required a total redesign of the turret and hull. As testing continued, German engineers pushed the Shermans through hundreds of kilometers of off-road endurance runs, tracking every malfunction, repair, and component issue. They compared these results to reports from German units fighting. On the Eastern and Italian fronts, the numbers told a clear story. Panther operational, readiness, the percentage of tanks ready for battle, averaged below 40%. Through most of 1943, some units dropped as low as 20-25%, meaning fewer than 1 in 5 tanks were fit for combat at any given time. By contrast, Shermans in every theater maintained much higher readiness rates, often double or triple what the Panthers could manage. German field reports revealed just how bad things had been. In July 1943, during Operation Citadel at Kursk, Panthers achieved only 16% readiness. More tanks broke down from mechanical failures than were lost to enemy fire. By December 1943, that number crept up to 37%, and by February 1944 it was still stuck there. Only by April 1944 did it reach 50%, and May 1944 finally saw a temporary high of 78% operational, even at its best. The Panther's reliability never came close to the Sherman's, a tank that had been dependable right from its very first production run. By December 1943, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Anyone looking honestly at the data could see the pattern. The Sherman's diesel engine regularly lasted over 3,000 kilometers with proper maintenance. In comparison, the Panther's engine barely made it to 1,000 kilometers, and that was after improvements. German reports from March 1944 even celebrated Panther engines reaching 700 to 1,000 kilometers of service life as a success. But that so-called success only brought them to about one-third of the Sherman's durability. The difference didn't stop there. Sherman transmissions needed almost no maintenance between overhauls. Their synchronized gears made it easy for drivers to shift smoothly, reducing the risk of damage. The Panther's gearbox, however, was a constant headache. It required frequent repair, and third gear broke so often that crews were taught to skip it entirely, jumping straight from second to fourth just to avoid failure. The Sherman's final drives also proved nearly indestructible, while the Panthers often failed within 100 to 200 kilometers of heavy. Used reports from the field confirmed what German engineers at Kummersdorf had already learned. Desperate for reliable machines, German mechanized units began using captured Shermans whenever they could find them intact. Unlike the Soviet T-34s, which Germans had to modify heavily before use, the Shermans needed no changes at all. They worked perfectly as built. German crews who had spent months wrestling with breakdowns in their own Panthers and Tigers were astonished by the Sherman's dependability. In letters and field reports, they wrote about how the tank simply worked. Sherman crews could focus on fighting the enemy, while German crews often worried about whether their tanks would even reach the battlefield. A report from Panzer regiments noted that Sherman drivers could plan tactics confidently, while Panther and Tiger crews constantly feared their vehicles would break down mid-mission. In January 1945, during Operation Nordwind, the 10th SS Panzer Division captured 12 M4A3 Shermans at Hatten-Rittershofen, Hildesheim, from the 43rd U.S. Tank Battalion. The Americans had abandoned them during the German assault. The captured tanks were quickly put into service as the 13th Company of the 10th SS Panzer Regiment, and they stayed in combat until the war's end. The Shermans were used as reconnaissance and mobile reserve tanks, roles that demanded long-distance movement without constant maintenance stops. And they performed flawlessly. German commanders saw firsthand what Kummersdorf engineers had been saying since 1943. American tanks could be trusted to run when needed. In the final months of the war, that reliability mattered more than anything else. A Sherman that arrived on the battlefield with a working gun was far more valuable than a powerful Panther broken down 20 kilometers behind the lines. As 1944 began, German engineers expanded their testing program as new captured Shermans arrived from multiple fronts. They studied each variant closely. At Kummersdorf, they tested the M4A1, powered by the Continental R975 radial engine, the M4A2, fitted with twin General Motors 6046 diesel engines, and the M4A3, equipped with the Ford GAA V8 gasoline engine, considered by American crews the best of all. Every single version demonstrated the same core strength, outstanding automotive reliability, born from smart engineering and top-quality manufacturing. German engineers were stunned by how consistent that quality was. In their own factories, even tanks of the same model often varied widely in reliability. The diesel-powered M4A2 impressed them most. The Soviets had received over 4,100 of these through Lend-Lease, and many were captured during Germany's retreats on the Eastern Front. The twin GM diesel engines matched the performance of other Sherman variants while using much less fuel, a critical advantage as Germany's own fuel reserves were running out. German designers had experimented with diesel tank engines before the war, but had abandoned the idea because fuel injection was too complex for their limited production capabilities. The Americans, however, were building gasoline and diesel Shermans, side by side without slowing production or lowering quality. It was proof of a flexible, mature industrial system, one that German industry could never match under wartime pressure. By March 1944, the German High Command finally began to acknowledge the obvious. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, reported in official correspondence that Panther reliability had reached acceptable standards. The improvements he praised meant that Panther engines now lasted 700 to 1,000 kilometers, and that final drive failures, once catastrophic, had been mostly solved through better design and manufacturing. But what Guderian called a triumph only brought German tanks up to where the Sherman had been since its first production run in 1942. In truth, the German army was celebrating a milestone the Americans had surpassed from day one. It was a quiet admission that German tank development had fallen far behind. That gap only grew as Allied strategic bombing targeted the heart of German industry. Factories producing Panther and Tiger components were systematically struck, crippling output. On the night of April 27-28, 1944, 322 Royal Air Force bombers attacked the Maybach engine plant in Friedrichshafen, along with the nearby ZF gearbox factory. According to records from the Imperial War Museum, it was the single most damaging air raid on German tank production during the entire war. The results were devastating. Engine and transmission production stopped completely for 6 months. When operations finally resumed in November 1944, quality had collapsed. By then, German factories were running on slave labor, as skilled workers had been drafted into the army. The sabotage that followed was subtle but deadly. Cigarette filters jammed into oil passages, gaskets installed backward, and tight tolerances ignored. Panthers and Tigers left the factory already doomed to fail. Sherman production, on the other hand, continued safely across the Atlantic, in modern plants, untouched by bombing, staffed by motivated workers earning fair wages under safe conditions. The real difference between the two nations wasn't knowledge, it was industrial philosophy. German engineers understood tank mechanics as well as any American, but they never built with mass production or field reliability in mind. Instead, they pursued impressive specifications, thick armor, massive guns, high performance, while neglecting the mechanical systems that had to support all that weight. The Panther's powerful 75mm KWK-42 gun and heavy frontal armor came at the cost of an overworked engine and drivetrain struggling to move 45 tons of steel. The Tiger, even more formidable, required constant maintenance and expert crews just to keep running. These trade-offs might have been manageable if Germany could produce tanks and spare parts in large numbers, but by 1944, it simply couldn't. Across the ocean, American engineers, trained by decades of automotive mass production, approached tank design differently. They built the M4 Sherman to be produced by the tens of thousands and maintained by mechanics with basic tools and minimal training. The Sherman's powertrain used commercially proven components borrowed straight from the auto industry. Its electrical system even featured a backup generator, allowing the turret to traverse electrically even when the main engine was off. A small touch that German designers saw as an unnecessary luxury, but in battle, it was often a lifesaver. German tankers could only dream of such conveniences. Many of them had learned the hard way what happened when their turret traverse failed because the engine had stalled halfway up a slope. That simple problem, something Sherman crews barely thought about, could turn a Panther into a sitting target. These kinds of user-friendly features never appeared in German design manuals. To their engineers, armor thickness and gun power always came first. Reliability, ease of use, those were secondary, almost trivial concerns. By the spring of 1944, German reports from every front carried the same warning: mechanical failures were spreading fast, manufacturing quality was falling, spare parts were scarce and field workshops were overwhelmed. The mighty Panther, the pride of German armor, had become a fragile machine. Its final drives couldn't even survive road marches beyond 100 kilometers, forcing commanders to transport their tanks by rail just to keep them running. Orders from the front were blunt. Move only when absolutely necessary. A tank to break down before reaching the battlefield had become a daily reality. Even the Berge Panther, the recovery vehicle, designed to tow disabled Panthers, shared the same mechanical weaknesses. Was not uncommon for the rescuer to break down beside the tank it was supposed to save. The statistics were devastating. By 1944, some Panzer units reported that up to 70% of their tank losses came not from Allied guns, but from mechanical failure. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, American factories were doing what Germany never could, producing tanks faster than anyone could destroy them. The United States built 49,324 Sherman tanks, more than all German tank types combined. Thousands went to British Commonwealth forces through Lend-Lease. Over 4,000 diesel Shermans rolled east to the Soviet Union, where they proved far more reliable than many Soviet-made machines. Even in the jungles of Burma, Chinese forces used Shermans to crush Japanese armor that was hopelessly outclassed. Everywhere the Sherman fought, it carried the same reputation. It just worked. German crews who captured Shermans and used them in combat said so themselves. They wrote home about how easily they started, how smoothly they ran, how simple they were to fix. Reports from the Eastern Front tell remarkable stories. German mechanics who had once dreaded the intricate Maybach engines were amazed by the Sherman's Chrysler A57 multibank engine, 5 car engines bolted together into one. To them, it seemed complex on paper, but in practice, it was easier to maintain than their own engines, which required constant adjustment of valves, timing, and carburetors. The Ford GIA V8, America's powerhouse, earned universal praise from Allied crews, but German mechanics admired it too. They called it remarkably dependable, a word rarely used in their own reports. Even the General Motors twin diesel engine, which the U.S. Army had considered inferior and reserved for Lend-Lease, performed better than any diesel engine Germany ever built for a tank. The Sherman's design had something the Germans rarely built in: engineering margin. Its transmission and final drive, originally designed for a 30-ton tank with 400 horsepower, could handle the 42-ton M4A3E2 jumbo assault tank with no changes at all. Those same components even survived 650 horsepower. Experimental engines without braking. German engineers would have called that wasteful, unnecessary overbuilding that used too much steel. American engineers called it insurance, room to grow, and room to survive. That difference in thinking defined the outcome of 1944. By summer, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, German Panzer commanders already knew the truth. Their technical disadvantage went far beyond gun calibers or armor plates. They were losing because their tanks couldn't stay in the fight. American armor kept moving, attacking, regrouping, and pushing forward, while German divisions paused constantly for repairs and refits. Every kilometer they drove brought them closer to another mechanical failure. Sherman battalions could fight today, refuel tonight, and attack again tomorrow. Panzer divisions had to calculate how many tanks might break down before the battle even began, and the final proof came from the Germans themselves. When Otto Skorsenny's 150th Panzer Brigade prepared for the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, they searched desperately for captured American vehicles to disguise their infiltration. Their first choice wasn't the Tiger or even the Panther, it was the Sherman, because even the enemy knew the American tank could be trusted to run. The 150th Panzer Brigade had hoped to use captured Shermans for their secret operation during the Battle of the Bulge, but in the end, they got only 2, and just one of them actually worked well enough to move. Even that single Sherman never reached the fight. Massive traffic jams clogged every road, stopping the infiltration before it began. Ironically, this mission, which demanded vehicles that could run for hours behind enemy lines without breaking down, could only have succeeded with American machines. German tanks, even when freshly serviced, simply couldn't be trusted for that kind of endurance. Then came January 23, 1945, the day Germany officially admitted its automotive failure. At a meeting of the Panzer Commission, engineers submitted a devastating report. Catastrophic final drive failures were happening across every German tank type. The numbers were shocking. Before the 1945 Eastern Offensive, there were 500 defective final drives in Panzer IVs, 370 in Panthers, and around 100 in Tigers. Even the Hetzer tank destroyer, built on the lighter Czech 38-ton chassis, had nearly 200 failures. General Wolfgang Thomall, chief of staff under Guderian, summarized the situation bluntly. Under these conditions, orderly use of tanks is simply impossible. Crews had lost faith in their machines. Some abandoned their tanks the moment a final drive problem appeared, afraid they'd be stranded and captured if they tried to push forward. The mighty German tanks, once built to inspire fear with their thick armor and powerful guns, had failed in the most basic way imaginable. They couldn't stay running long enough to fight. At Kummersdorf, engineers prepared to evacuate as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin. They scrambled to pack years of testing data and ship their reports west, hoping someone might preserve the lessons for the post-war world. Few of the captured tanks, and including at least 2 Shermans, were even thrown into desperate frontline service defending the capital. In those last chaotic days, they fought side by side with German Panthers and Tigers. The results spoke for themselves. The Shermans kept running until they were destroyed by enemy fire or abandoned, only when their fuel ran out. The German tanks, by contrast, broke down again, even in these final battles at Truri. Crews who thought they'd seen every failure were still shocked by how fast their machines gave out. The story of War Daddy II and the many Shermans tested at Kummersdorf stands as one of the clearest examples of industrial contrast. In World War II, German engineers, trapped in a system obsessed with theoretical perfection, built tanks that looked brilliant on paper, but fell apart in the real world. American engineers, guided by decades of automotive experience, focused on practicality and consistency. Their tanks weren't flashy or over-engineered, but they worked, again and again wherever the fight took them. In war, that's what truly matters. The weapon that functions when you need it most will always beat the one that might work, if it ever makes it to the battlefield. After the war, American and British intelligence teams confirmed what the Germans at Kummersdorf already knew. Their inspections of destroyed German tanks told the same story. Just as many machines were lost to mechanical failure as to enemy fire. Final, drives shattered under stress, transmissions seized from poor, lubrication engines burned out from overheating or oil, starvation, Germany's obsession with individual tank superiority, with making each machine a masterpiece, had blinded them to a simple truth. Reliability wins wars. The Germans built tanks so complicated that ordinary mechanics couldn't keep them running without special training. Their engines needed constant care from expert technicians, and their supply system couldn't handle the endless variety of parts needed to keep all those different tank models working. The testing done at Kummersdorf taught the Germans some painful but valuable lessons. Lessons that would shape their post-war tank designs in West Germany. When the new Federal Republic began developing the Leopard 1 in the 1950s, designers decided to focus on reliability and easy maintenance, not just fancy performance stats. They studied American automotive engineering and applied those principles directly to military tanks. The result was a design that borrowed much from what made the Sherman so successful: a strong, dependable powertrain, easy field repairs using simple tools, standardized parts, and room to upgrade without having to rebuild the whole tank from scratch. The Leopard 1 went on to become one of the most successful tanks of the Cold War, serving in many armies and staying in production for decades. The Shermans tested at Kummersdorf, including the famous War Daddy II, with its name still painted on the hull, were more than just captured enemy tanks. They were proof that practical engineering and industrial maturity mattered, far more than chasing theoretical perfection. German designers believed that building technically superior tanks could offset their material and numerical disadvantages, but they were wrong. The Americans focused on building tanks that were reliable, easy to fix and ready to fight, and that approach won the war. The gap in reliability between the Sherman and German tanks didn't just affect battles. It reshaped how military industries thought about what truly wins wars. Germany entered World War II with incredible science and advanced weapons, but without the industrial capacity to produce or maintain them on a large scale. They simply couldn't keep up once the war dragged on and their enemies attacked on multiple fronts. The U.S., by contrast, entered the war with simpler, less advanced weapons, but an enormous industrial base that could produce them in massive numbers while constantly improving their performance. That industrial strength, seen clearly in the Sherman's design and production, proved far more powerful than Germany's obsession with technical superiority. The U.S. built nearly as many Shermans as Germany built all tank types combined, all while supplying its allies fighting a global war and maintaining a strong home front. The math was brutally simple. A Sherman with a 75mm gun that could actually reach the battlefield and fight was worth infinitely more than a Panther that broke down before the battle even started. Tank unit with 80% of its vehicles running could win, fights that a unit with only 40% working tanks never could. Reliability wasn't a small bonus. It was the core of operational success. German tanks failed this test again and again. American tanks passed it consistently. By mid-1943, tests at Kummersdorf made the truth undeniable. German tanks like the Panther and Tiger looked terrifying on paper, but on the battlefield, they broke down when they were needed most. The Sherman didn't win World War II through thicker armor or a bigger gun. It won through mechanical reliability, easy maintenance, and sheer industrial power. German engineers at Kummersdorf saw this for themselves. They wrote detailed reports proving it. They tested it over and over with scientific accuracy. They understood why the Sherman worked, but they couldn't fix their own problems. Germany's industry simply didn't have the capacity to redesign tanks around reliability while fighting a losing war on every front. America, on the other hand, had already built reliability into its civilian automotive industry and just scaled that up for war. That single captured Sherman, War Daddy 2, told the whole story. Every kilometer it ran without breaking down was proof that German engineers had taken the wrong path, chasing perfection instead of practicality. Every test showed that American industry had mastered the balance between technology and reliability. Every comparison between Sherman and German tanks showed that America had solved problems Germany didn't even realize existed. War Daddy 2 wasn't a special tank. It was one of nearly 49,000 built. But what it represented was devastating for Germany, proof that they had already lost the industrial war even before the fighting ended. No matter how advanced their designs looked on paper, Germany could never match American reliability, production, or power.